Good evening. We are going to be painting the T-Rex from Unmatched. Now, I usually start with a coat of primer that supports the overall tone I'm aiming for. I wanted something a little bit warmer, so I chose Xandri Dust. First, we're going to apply the Coralberg Crimson shade. I'm going to go right for the details in the mouth now. This wash will fill in the grooves, all the while leaving somewhat the Xandri Dust exposed on the raised areas, creating more of a pink, fleshy tone. And the edges of the mouth there as well will allot for the same sinew. I'm going to apply this to the entire coat of the tongue and around the tip. And let it reservoir around the base of the teeth, applying it quite liberally. For quick coverage, I went with a contrast green paint. I wanted a green that would be fairly opaque when applied, but again, you can see through the raised areas of the contrast. The Xandri Dust nicely creates a warmer, lighter green tone. Because the texture of the T-Rex in the film varies, I liberally and randomly apply immunitarium green across the miniature to emulate the texture pattern seen in the film. Mostly on the raised parts, the parts that face the sun the most. And the randomness is really kind of nice. I'm not really too much worried about precision. It's just more about having a big green lizard. I'll thin out the paints on my brush, sometimes add a little bit of water to them, so that way the wash can permeate the crevices and go deeper. Now, obviously on the legs here, I'm applying a little bit more heavy contrast paint because I want it to be a thicker coat, and then wiping the excess off onto my napkin allows the detail to resurface on the miniature. Necrotic flesh is a great undercoat mixed with the contrast medium. Thins it out again, which allows me to apply the paint liberally wherever I want to in the spotted pattern that's found on the T-Rex. Again, just looking for the areas that I left uncoated of the Xandri Dust and liberally applying this rough sketch to the texture of the T-Rex. You can apply this however you like. Right here, I'm just applying wherever I find the Xandri Dust exposed, so I at least have a completely covered miniature. And then using a little bit of water and thinning it out. Again, I'm not too worried about lighting direction as I am just making sure the texture is seamless and ties together with a nice little gradient fill from one color to the next. It's a cheat for a wet blend where you liberally apply one color on top of the other while they're still really wet, and then continually to mix and dab the two paints together. Obviously, you want the tip of the nose to be a little bit brighter, and the tip of the jaw. Places where the skin might be a little bit thinner. Create an overall interesting pattern of greens. Here I am liberally applying water to the 2 coats of paint to somewhat create a little bit more of a smooth gradient, a little bit smoother of a transition between the paint colors. Again, spotting some textures and some area in the skin help to sell the lizard-like patterns as seen in the film, the scaly skin hide, the varying colors. And here, a gobi brown is used. And I'm just applying again a couple dabs of the contrast technical medium to thin out the paint, loosen up the viscosity, and allow it to flow in some of the regions of the detailed miniature, leaving that nice texture. Now with this paint, any places that the T-Rex may have a slightly darker or a brown shade or hue to it, I'm liberally applying, again, just to break up the texture and pattern and give it some variety and interest. Even tying it into the lighter color, this dark brown produces a nice natural gradient flow from a dark to a light brown. Again, liberally painted underneath the jaw where the sun would at least be exposed. To just wet blend and mix the brown using water to thin it out and just add a nice subtle transition of colors, again, to kind of insinuate the skin and how it's flexing around and the musculature and structure of the T-Rex. Using the stippling technique, the bristles really do a lot of work for you. Now, I know I'm going to be covering the toes and feet in mud, but for right now, just adding a little bit of that brown liberally down there, just in case any of it comes showing through, we'll tie it in nicely. By wet blending the browns into the greens, it thins out the saturation of those pigments and brings down the values. Now taking a dark stone, we begin pushing contrast in the deeper, darker recesses to closely match the screen-accurate T-Rex. In the deep recesses of the sockets of the eyes, running down the nose, a little bit on the front of the jaws. Any place where I want to create the illusion that there is a more volumetric surface. If you want something to appear more rounded, add a shadow. And that will help create the illusion of volume. Again, using the techniques from the first several applications, where the most saturated and the thickest globules of paint are applied. And then wet blend it in using a little bit of water and a little bit of dry brush technique. Should produce a nice subtle gradient result. Again, reaching for the recesses and creating that sense of volume, allowing that arm to stick out, allowing this leg to stick out by applying it in the recesses, pushing that contrast in the darker areas. By keeping track of all the recesses and how they relate to the lighter areas will help create a unified visual experience no matter where this miniature sits on the table, as it's a universal technique for applying lighting and shading. From a single light direction. As I begin to push the contrast further, I apply less of the contrast medium and Lamian medium and apply the dark stone more direct from the paint pot, again to control the amount of saturation and how dark the shadows and the recesses should be. Again, stippling some of the dark stone throughout the rest of the figure will help tie it in together with its shadowed recesses, and is the perfect color for a T-Rex pedicure and manicure. Pushing the contrasts towards the extremities of the hands and the feet help to accentuate them against whatever background. Now using the dry underhive ash. This is a technical paint, more like a dry brush. And upon applying it to your brush, remove the excess and lightly scrub your dry brush across the miniature along the raised areas. This again furthers the value scale on the T-Rex. And being straight from the pot stays at its most saturated potency, but for the dry brush technique, it inherits the greens beneath it. Staying pretty monofocused on a light direction coming from above. I hit the raised areas to accentuate the details. Dry brushing is a technique that can be pushed too far too quickly. And so I often go for a sense of feeling the color as opposed to seeing the color. Sometimes I'll apply a lot and sometimes I'll apply a little, but overall my mindset is one of, if I notice it too much, I've applied it too heavily. I remove the excess from the brush. And in areas I want to create, again, higher contrast and interest, like the face, I'll leave it a little bit more saturated in the brush. But places where I just want to have a light feeling for it, like on the back of the legs here, I remove the majority of it. I'm going to bring some dark stone back into the eyes here to help, again, push that recess. And by applying that stippling technique, so the majority of the color is saturated as dark as possible in the recesses, and then I can liberally create a contrast wash by applying water and gradiating it out. into the surrounding colors. And we apply a little water, again thin that out, and turning the paint into a contrast paint, essentially working it around the surrounding areas to create a seamless transition and gradient and blend. This will help bring focus to the face and eyes again by pushing the contrast the most on the face. And I apply to both eyes. I apply strokes with purpose at this stage, thinking carefully of the topographical detail of the miniature and where shadows may fall naturally being lit from above, where skin may be a little bit thicker and thinner, and overall visual interest and impact. Using a wet brush, I work the paint into a contrast paint, focusing on the edges for a nice smooth color transition. And again, we continue to build up our washes and our paints to push contrast further. By following the contours of the deepest, darkest recesses and lines, we accentuate the areas on the T-Rex where light doesn't reach very easily. Now, I've heard this prop in the Jurassic Park films has had two nicknames, one being Rexy and one being Roberta. It just depends on the phase of production that you were on, as Jurassic Park went through several different types of phases of development and several different teams of people that would participate into its creation. And the several artists who helped bring the T-Rex to life would eventually end up in the hands of the great Stan Winston. But before Stan, many others were hired to get the project started. Which name do you prefer, Rexy or Roberta? Comment in the section below. So again, I'm refining the nails of Roberta here. I'm prepping for Vallejo's thick mud. Using a sculpting tool, press the thick mud into the crevices where it can dry and harden while still leaving the T-Rex's feet somewhat exposed, emulating, again, her most famous moment in the film Jurassic Park, in the wet rain. I mean, look at this. What a terrible angle. You can barely see where I'm applying it. Does anybody know that I'm recording, including myself? kind of take a look at the teeth here. We want those to pop out again, as they are a key feature to Roberta. So testing some white paints. And lowering the viscosity of the paint enables me to get the paint to flow freely within the recesses of really difficult to reach areas, such as in the eyes and around the teeth. I'm going to use a green-gray now, because I'm a firm believer that when painting, you should avoid using pure white and black at all costs. They raise your values quickly or drop your values to a white or a darker version of the color. However, using a pure white or black will also remove pigment saturation, creating a grayer version of the color you apply. So by using a green-gray, I apply it onto the teeth, and because the teeth in value are the lightest part of the miniature, they stand out naturally, even with a green-gray paint. It's like when you go to the dentist and they coat your teeth with that protective, slimy, sugar-coated enamel paste. We're just protecting Roberta here from 65 million years of plaque. Now, using a dark wash, I go into the deepest recesses of the areas, again furthering that contrast. Again, painting with focus and purpose. I'm careful to specifically choose targeted areas. In order to bring out the last few details. The viscosity of this paint is incredibly low, meaning that it's more likely to flow into the deeper crevices of the detail of the mini when applied liberally than stick to the surface on which it's applied. That lower viscosity really goes a long way, especially when applying washes, as it maintains the integrity of the detail of the miniature without compromising the ability to reach in hard to access areas. It also emphasizes existing details by flowing into the recesses. Again, adding some volume to the calf by darkening the underside of it. Adding some volume to the feet. Again, I'm just letting the miniature inform me where shadows would naturally fall, and liberally applying a dark contrast paint to match that information. Now we grab a nice little crimson red, thin it up some water, and I'm going to just tint the edges of the mouth just a little bit more. After all, this is a very intimidating character on the board. And when you're playing Roberta in the Jurassic Park Unmatched game, the last thing you want is your opponent to be able to point and laugh hysterically as you trip around the board trying to consume him. Here I am mixing a little bit of dark stone with a little bit of white. Now, I mentioned earlier, mixing white into your colors will drop the saturation of a color. To dry brush across the raised surfaces of the nails and create a natural specular desaturated highlight. And the rule of thumb generally is that if you have a cool light source, you'll have warm shadows, and if you have a warm light source, you'll have cool shadows. And now we're going to bloodstain the teeth up so that Roberta doesn't look like she just came out of the dentist. Insert your own annoying dentist drill sound effect here. Again, the low viscosity of having a contrast paint allows the natural orange and yellow to flow into the base of the teeth and coat the edge of the gum, leaving a nice, warm, blood-stained series of highlights. Pushing the blood staining on a few various teeth randomly in the mouth helps create a sense of realism. Now using the Nurgle's Rot Slimy Booger texture paint, place this along the base in the same brush stippling pattern approach as we did with the scales on the T-Rex. Again, it just will create a nice uniform feel. And taking a darker blue and mixing it in with the technical Lamy medium, lowering the viscosity of the paint again, as we want this paint to be freely to flow within the details. Again, avoid using black and use this dark blue around the edge of the base, being that the mud is a warm texture. So I use a cool color on the edges to help create a nice natural contrast between those two colors. Thinning that down again with a little bit more water so the viscosity is compromised, and now begin applying to underside and shadow edges and underneath the feet to again marry the shadow texture of a cool color underneath the feet to the warmly lit exposed mud texture everywhere else on the base. Using the Winsor Newton .005 ink pen, having a extremely precise control to applying the dilated pupil, the roundness nib of the .05, and now using more of the Nurgle's Rot. I'm going to apply the Nurgle's Rot around areas of the face to create an illusion of moisture and, again, pushing those values, making them a little bit brighter around the key areas that I want the focus to be. This shot is horribly framed, and my apologies. Allowing that saturated green to just inherit the colors of all the greens from beneath it. This is a nice finishing touch. To highlighting key ridges and edges all over the body. And touching up some last little uniform moments of natural gradient progression. The Nurgle's Rot really does bring with it a nice little kind of extra gloss punch too, which insinuates the moisture as seen in the famous rain scene. Because I forgot where I've applied the paint to the miniature, at times I refrain from touching the miniature, giving it just a few moments to let it dry before I engage it again. I don't know how many times I have applied a paint and ended up just ruining the paint job because I grabbed the miniature too quickly. Again, having lower thinned paints is nice because by adding dilution to them, such as the lava medium in the water, those materials evaporate quicker, producing a dry result almost immediately. She is ready for battle on the Unmatched game and ready to take on Ali Sattler. Thank you for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe for more fun Paint Panther videos.